venture is a dressed up sales job. And people forget this. I said it at the top. A drummer is in service to a song. A venture capitalist is in service to a customer. It's a sales job.
Welcome to Partner Path, a podcast that unpacks the venture capital and growth equity ecosystem from a junior perspective. Young entrepreneurs and investors have already had a massive impact on the industry, having started unicorns and launched billion-dollar funds. We discuss these success stories and more by sharing perspectives and advice from some of the industry's most prominent role models. This podcast expresses our views as of the date published and does not represent the views of and is not endorsed by any company for which we work.
Joining us today is Pete Mathias, partner at Alumni Ventures. Prior to Alumni, Pete was at Bertelsmann, where he was a senior director across the European Union, China, and U.S. startup ecosystems. Pete is also a drummer in a band called Filliger. After traveling the world for 14 years, Pete decided to settle down in New York and hone his creative talents in the world of investing. Now at Alumni, Pete focuses on strategic technologies critical to the United States. Welcome, Pete.
Laura, Will, thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely thrilled.
So, to say you had a unique start in venture would be an understatement. Can you take us back to undergrad at Dartmouth and what you sought to do after graduation?
Absolutely. Look, they say many roads lead to Rome. Many roads lead to venture. I happen to had been in a rock band that ended up hitting the road after graduation from college and doing the 0 to 1, 1 to 100 that they talk about in startup land. My band started in a basement in Chicago and ended up touring not only all over the US, but really much of the world. So I can certainly relate to founders who are starting from a basement or a garage or things like that, except it's a garage rock band, not a garage tech company.
Okay, so you were in a rock band, but I don't draw a lot of parallels from rock band to a 9 to 5. Where did your career take you after the band?
Well, first, the arts and technology, these are twins that are separated. A lot of people think, oh, the art world and the tech world are in tension and that they're somehow not reinforcing. But for me, they were totally reinforcing. So professional musician for years, in parallel to that, a technologist, someone who was obsessive about the future. And so all the while my band was on tour, we were tinkering with tech. And at the time, this was the cradle of a lot of companies that became huge. For example, Uber, when they were really just getting started, reached out to my band and said, "Hey, you guys have fans at your shows. Could you guys help promote our app? Because maybe they want to take a ride home." Uber sounds like a cool company. Sure, we'll try it out. Square, the payments company, we were using Square because guess what? Will, Laura, a band is mobile workforce. So we were actually using some of the first generation Square readers that plug into the back of your phone. The arts and technology, these are twins separated at birth. And so I was really building an entrepreneurial pedigree through all of that. And so by the time I decided to actually do venture, it is actually in some ways second nature.
Got it. And so when you say decide to do venture, what was that point? We read that you did missions with the US Department of State to Russia, the Middle East, and North Africa, which is where you developed your passion for startups addressing energy, healthcare, infrastructure, security, transportation. And so I'm assuming something, within those areas led you to kind of develop this passion.
Totally. So I was in business school. I actually did a joint program, business school and public policy. And I, at the time, was working on my own startup in an incubator on campus. It was quite literally a bulletin on the wall that noted a venture capital meetup happening. I candidly, truthfully, did not know venture capital was a thing. I didn't know the first thing about it, but because I had a startup and they mentioned funding, the F word, I showed up. And the second I learned about this professional architecture, this job that put founders and creative people alongside of financiers and capital, I knew I wanted to be there. So I found out about venture, did a fellowship, the student fellowship, and the rest is really history. I never looked back after that.
You've kind of already touched on music and biz tech and whatnot, but I mean, what parallels do you draw from drumming, and you're still a drummer, to venture capital?
The drummer and a venture capitalist have one big thing in common. Something in common that actually most investors probably forget, that like a drummer who is in service to a band, a venture capitalist investor is in service to a company. This is often forgotten. A lot of VCs think they're the rock star, but a drummer lays down the beat, lays down the rhythm, and is, for most bands, a little bit behind the scenes, out of the spotlight, and quietly being in service to something much bigger. So for me, I aspire to take the virtues of a quiet, consistent, but dependable drummer to my work as an investor, and to the way that I work with our portfolio companies and our broader stakeholders too, our LPs, our strategic partners, all of it. That's how I really think about it.
A traditional background in venture, you see a lot of former operators, former founders turned investor. You have your investment bankers, your consultants, but you definitely have a non-traditional background and have made a really great name for yourself by investing in some awesome companies. How would you say that having a non-traditional background can contribute to the success of venture capital funds?
At one point, a dear friend of mine helped me have more confidence in my background when I initially thought, Jesus is like a little off the wall. And she said, Pete, founders love polymaths. And first I was like, wait, that's a SAT word. I forgot what that means. The polymath is someone who has many interests, has varied pursuits. And it's totally true. Founders are totally people that by and large love many things. They're not single track tunnel vision folks executing A, B, C linearly. They're in many ways Renaissance individuals of many pursuits, talents, aptitudes, aspirations, etc. So lean into that, she said, and I did. And I think that has helped me stand out in an otherwise very competitive market. Now, it's not enough to just have a funky background. It's not enough just to know your rudiments as a drummer. This is an investing job. In the end, it comes down to very, very clear-cut key performance indicators. And so there's a technical rigor that you have to learn. Therefore, do lean into those, because like mastering any craft, there's a lot to learn in venture that have to do with fundamentals. So I have a lot of respect for people that came from investment banking or private equity or great institutions like yourself, Laura, where finance is the name of the game. So for me, I try to do a little bit of both but not hiding who I am at my core.
It's a great transition into understanding. Walk us through the structure of the fund and how you kind of see the differentiate in what is a crowded market in venture capital.
When I joined Alumni Ventures over 2 years ago, it was because Alumni Ventures AV answers one thing, which is very, very hard for an investor to answer. What are you bringing to the table beyond capital? Capital is not enough, as they say. So Alumni Ventures helped answer that. And how? Because Alumni Ventures is one of the only funds, and it certainly was really one of the first movers to bring a network powered approach to venture, bringing individuals, accredited investors, into the innovation world as an asset class. So AV has just a bit over 10,000 LPs. We have over 600,000 people in our community, and that actually converts into a genuine network. Every fund on earth will say, hey, we've got a great network. We can make introductions to XYZ. Alumni Ventures is not a network in theory. It is a network in practice. This is something that our founders who we back appreciate day one. They see this in action. This helps us stand out. It's still a tough market. It's still hard to win competitive allocations, but this is something that it certainly stands out, Will, to your point, in an otherwise very competitive market.
Right. To use your earlier analogy, maybe the drum solo of sorts.
Yeah, exactly.
AV has 1,100 portfolio companies, I believe, right? It's kind of 15 to 20 checks per month, which is an outstanding amount of deal flow. I'd love to hear you and other investors' approach to access and finding an angle into those opportunities.
There is two types of investment opportunities. The investment opportunities that come on your doorstep or show up on in your inbox. So those that come to you and those that don't. The ones that don't come to you, you have to get out there in the world. You need to be proactive and see and take on the world. So Alumni Ventures does a really good job of getting out there. It is a fund that made a simple observation that affinities and communities drive a lot of the best things that humans do. So some cases your alumni network, your peers at school, in some cases, thematic interests. And Alumni Ventures has done a really, really good job systematizing how it thinks about networks. And so I've seen this front and center. And part of the reason that you have that access is because you've got a team of dedicated, inspired investors and broader teammates that are really, really working hard to get out there into the world. So on Thursday, I'll host Chips Night in New York City on semiconductors. In the fall, I hosted Nuclear Night, bringing the nuclear energy community together, Cyber Night in cybersecurity, defense and deep tech night back last spring. And that's just one example of many efforts to really get out there in the world and bring the innovation community together.
Double clicking on that at a high level, you kind of mentioned two different types of opportunities. I'm curious to hear your answer to this bifurcated by the two. What does it take in order for alumni to say yes or no to a founder, or anything that sticks out during the diligence process that you'd want to highlight?
One benefit that Alumni Ventures has is that scale, that the implied pattern recognition, and what I would describe as a pretty systematized way of assessing a company. And so without getting too much into detail or our internal process, everything is subjected to a rigorous rubric that ranges on intrinsics of the company. So things like the underlying business model, the unit economics, the various traction KPIs based on sectors, but also extrinsics, market intelligence and things of that nature. So it's highly systematized. It's absolutely not like hey, yes, no, should we do this or should we not? Some firms operate that way. Some firms have one GP with influence, and if they want to do the deal, it's going to happen no matter what. And another GP who doesn't have much influence, and they're not going to get the deal across. We don't have that. We have a much more rigorous, systematized, frankly, just not gut based way of doing things. And I think that's been compounding over time, getting better and getting smarter at how we think about companies.
You mentioned pattern recognition earlier, which I think is such an important world in venture since we're looking at all different types of deals, especially being at a generalist fund like Alumni. So, how did you develop your strong pattern recognition skills?
I'm wet clay. I'm trying to every single day get better at the core underlying skills. I'll simply say that, like in music or like a sport, the more reps you do, the more informed you get. Not necessarily the better you get, because you can practice golf all you want. You don't necessarily get better unless you practice it the right way. But at least you know what good looks like. You know what a good golf swing looks like. You know what a good drum stroke looks like. That's what I have a little bit now, which is exposure to in general what are the pillars of an attractive venture capital opportunity.
And I know that Alumni or AV has a venture fellow program. You, back in the day, Pete, were a venture fellow yourself. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that program looks like and why you think it's important to AV.
Well, first off, fellowships in general are fantastic avenues into learning about venture. And so a nudge for folks interested in venture to explore the many different fellow programs there are. And a special shout out to the Alumni Ventures fellow program, because this is a chance really to create your own venture experience. Venture has always been an apprentice model. I mean, I think this is This is a relatively newer profession. As an actual job, it's a generation old, 70 years or so at this point. And so the fellowships are a way to be initially someone on your shoulder looking over the shoulder, and then at some point the angel or the devil saying don't do this, do this, that actually becomes more authoritative and involved. And so I think these are really, really great opportunities to dip your toes in the water, but at the same time create your own venture experience and actually lean in. So some fellows we've had in the past, they've actually gotten investments across that they've sourced themselves. And I think this is a really outstanding way to jump in and try out the job.
Is there anything in particular that you felt like you took away from your venture fellow experience that's helped you?
Yeah, this is the most important thing. Venture is a dressed up sales job. And people forget this. I said it at the top. A drummer is in service to a song. A venture capitalist is in service to a customer. It's a sales job. And so as a fellow, as a student fellow, I was tasked to source companies. You need to do to source companies, you need to knock on doors. Virtual doors, physical doors, you need to knock on doors. And so you need to be confident, just as a salesperson is talking to strangers, turning over rocks and chasing down the story and then guess what? Winning hearts and minds. It is super hard. It is super hard not only to get in front of people, but also to convince them that you're the right person to bring on board when they've got a ton of other choices. So we talk all the time in the assessment of companies about switching costs. Hey, what's the switching cost for that SaaS company? Is it high or is it low? Man, in venture, the switching costs of changing who your journey partner is going to be is a lifetime of cost. So you're talking about a really hard sales job, and that's what I learned as a fellow, that this is not for the faint of heart. If you don't like sales, it's tough. The product has to be good too. It's not just you need to sell, you need to deliver a very, very high quality service to that individual, to that team, to that company.
And speaking of selling, so something that you're constantly selling is deals that you're bringing to the table, bringing them to IC, to other partners. And one of your areas focus is nuclear energy, which one could argue might be a harder non-traditional venture investment just due to the non-traditional SaaS-like returns. First, Will and I don't spend much time and energy, so could you define this segment and why should VCs pay attention to it?
Laura, you're exactly right. It is a very different business model blueprint than SaaS. But let me point you to a couple of proof points about SaaS. First, on many different KPIs, sales cycle as one example, customer acquisition cost is another. We are in an era of hyper competition in SaaS, where the ideas that we are seeing are no longer order of magnitude consequential, but rather marginal. In other words, let's take music as one example. Spotify was a consequential, hugely disruptive company. Along came Tidal, along came a handful of others. Tidal and the others, these are marginal differences, no longer a consequential breakthrough. But the same is true in other areas. Fintech is a popular investment category. We had Venmo and we had PayPal first, and then we had many other fintechs pop up. But I would argue that a lot of those spaces now are competing on the margin, which is another way of saying software has eaten the world. Software has devoured industries. And if you held a dollar in 2010 and you just put it into software companies, you'd have $3 and change at this point. It's true. Software has eaten the world. But in my opinion, at this point, software's kind of had breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And at this point, it's kind of snacking on new industries. And so why do I start there? Because this is a hard time for software. And I haven't even taken from stage left the impact of AI on a lot of software companies. But it's just hard. So point two, ready for act two. This is an important historical reflection for investors to remember that when venture started as an asset class, as a dedicated place for professionals in the 1950s and 60s, companies like American Research Development Company, ARDC, were underwriting companies that no one today would have take a look at. So something like semiconductors and other deep tech stuff, but things that were absolutely venture in their scale. The last thing I'm going to mention, Alan Patricof, the founder of Greycroft, has a great book called No Red Lights. And in that book, he shares an amazing anecdote of the kinds of companies that he was looking at. And one of those companies was reimagining how Americans should travel to work. And the idea that he was pitched on was the idea of an edifice to protect people waiting for transportation that would have advertising on the sides. And that was the pitch of the what we now call the bus stop. And so today it's easy to drink the Kool-Aid, and I certainly do. And I love software companies just as much as anybody. But just remember that our job is outsized return, and no one says how to do that. And that's why nuclear energy, yes, remember the question about how do we define this, is particularly interesting. We have an anti-consensus, or at least a dark horse, that has a ton of potential, but perhaps not as much innovation. I mean, we're starting to see quite a bit, but it's latent, it's new, the different nuclear setups. And so I come just with an open mind to say, hey, we have a timeless universal need for energy. It's grid scale energy, industrial heat, power. Where are we going to get that from? And nuclear, you dig into it a little bit, is one of those dark horses that deserves attention.
And what part of nuclear energy specifically?
I believe that there's an entire life cycle where there may be venture opportunities. Without getting too much into detail on thesis, I would say that one is remote energy. There's some pretty cool companies out there that are creating reactor types that are designed for remote use cases. So remote communities, also for certain security purposes. This is one very interesting one where you could imagine a different type of reactor setup for that isolated use case. But also, hey, I've been spending a lot of time with the Department of Energy to learn more about just the life cycle of nuclear. And there might be like a waste management 2.0, 3.0 company that's just handling nuclear waste removal. In other words, a picks and shovels play for nuclear. It's a space where you need to be sober about the capital intensity, the timelines, but at the same time, the open-mindedness that is frankly lacking in a lot of the energy transition discussions. $3 trillion are going to be spent on capital investment for energy transition. How much of that do you think is going to nuclear? Not nearly as much as other renewables and other areas. So my view is a disciplined investment approach is warranted.
But do you think this is a broader issue, maybe outside of venture capital? As you mentioned, you're working with the Department of Energy, and there's some geopolitics as well that are involved, as well as just the regulatory environment. Do you think that has to shape out first before venture money can start flooding into the space?
We don't, and I don't know that we should time markets too much with innovation. Some say there's the last mover advantage, and maybe you sit on the sidelines until you have clarity of the geopolitical arena. But I think that the market need is already there. You look at the eurozone and the pressure that Germany is under, for example, to fuel its own people within its own borders, and you look at in general the stress fracture that the invasion of Ukraine has caused beyond Germany into all European neighbors, that the need is already really there for an all of the above approach to energy. In other words, I'm not advocating nuclear to replace any others. I'm simply saying nuclear should be a part of a resilient energy mix. And I think that's something you don't need to time markets on, because in any environment, we're going to need a strong, resilient, industrial grade energy mix.
So I'd love to turn over to maybe your experience elevating within AVP. You've led investments in unstructured IO. believer, Red Six, and we're promoted to partner, I think, within the past year. So congratulations there. Just talk us through, first of all, any key takeaways or highlights from your experience leading a couple investments for the firm, and then secondly, would love to get your opinion on what the skills you need are to make that transition into a partner level role at a venture firm.
I only can say this with some perspective. There are some things that you can help you along the way, do it well, but most importantly, to have a services mentality. The facts are this is a fast moving business, and so one thing that I always applied was to treat everything like it's due immediately. No one's going to say to you in venture when everything is due. This is not something that happens. You don't get an assignment with that you need to put on the desk at 9 a.m. It's something where you need to realize that in the absence of deadlines, everything is due immediately, which is to say, if there's a company that's intriguing to you, reach out to them immediately or reach out to a friend. You know who does this really well? Laura does this really well. She's someone who she gets it. She moves fast. That's something that I just treated because frankly, I had fear of losing the job. In fact, I wasn't really as much gunning for partner as much as I was fearing losing my job. I think that's something that I say with the perspective of an entrepreneur, a creative who realizes how hard it is to make a dollar in general, that you really need to work hard to keep this job. And that's something that has compounded for me because I treat everything like it's my last day in the job and this is my chance to really get to the next step. And then winning competitive allocations is about value from the first interaction. And so those moments where I have been brought into the table, it's been an outcome of trying to be an arrow in the quiver immediately to that company before I'm even on the cap table, just trying to be helpful. So yeah, I think that's the big stuff. Always learning wet clay, great humility, a lot to learn, and just never forgetting that I'm just like a drummer in service to people that aren't me.
This job is really hard and it's painted in a glamorous way. I mean, don't get me wrong, we have a lot of fun. But from the outside looking in, it's very pretty. When you're in, how do you know if it's necessarily not a good fit for you?
It's hard for me to say first because this is not a job or a career, it's a calling for me. I really love this work. That said, I believe pretty strongly within 2-3 months you'll know if this job is for you, or if you don't know, your peers will know. And there's probably a couple ways it manifests, but I think that the most obvious way it'll manifest is in your individual pipeline, your prospects. Are you someone that is comfortable getting out there in the world? And sourcing is one way to get a pretty good grip on whether you like that or not, because usually people that get out in the world, they know a lot of companies, maybe not ones that they would invest in, but somehow they're getting a beat what's going on, who's working on what. Oh, this person just left that company and they're starting a new one. That kind of intelligence, crowdsourcing, is something that you get when you fall in love with the job, when it doesn't feel like 9 to 5, when it kind of blurs into private and public life. And so I think that realization can come actually pretty quickly. If you don't realize it, certainly others around you will know.
For the final two questions, Pete, the first one is, what motivates you to work hard?
So I studied ancient history, classics. One of the more powerful things that I learned, I don't even remember exactly where, was about the ability, the opportunity to leave the world better off than you inherited it. In fact, in some ways, this is actually how in the ancient world they defined divinity. I mean, someone who comes in and leaves the world just much better off than they found it. I try to just take a very small mindset here to say that, can I just somehow not make it worse? So can I somehow, the city that I live in, or the family that I have, or the siblings that I love, or the friends, whoever, can I just somehow make it slightly better off than when Pete showed up? That really does motivate me. It's a pretty cool chance to to contribute in a small way to local history or municipal history, or in Ventures case, you have a chance to contribute to world history in some cases. But just approaching it with a little bit more of a small mindset, just try to not make it worse, not suck, just make it slightly better. And that's my big inspiration.
That's good. And what's a piece of advice you'd give your younger self?
You guys heard the story about Picasso when he was like sketching in some cafe, and someone came up to him. He was about to throw away the piece of paper he was drawing on, and this lady said, "Pablo Picasso, I recognized you, and may I please just have that paper you're about to throw away? I love your sketch." And he said, "No, you can't have my sketch. I can't just give you this." And she said, "Hey, Picasso, it only took you a few minutes to draw that. How could you not give that to me?" And Picasso kind of scowled back and said, "This picture did not take me a few minutes. This picture took me a lifetime." And I think that that's true. Good things are the accumulation of a lifetime of experience. And so for me, my younger self, just say, "Pete, keep doing you. Don't give up. Be the best version of yourself." And somehow it'll end up making sense and being okay. I think I'd probably give that advice.
That's great. What a positive, inspirational note to end on. Pete, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. We loved hearing about everything from your drumming experience and hearing the parallels to your venture investing career. So appreciate the time.
Likewise, Will. Likewise, Laura. It's a terrific podcast, very thoughtful questions, and I look forward to us actually getting dinner and talking more shop offline.